Last night showed that we are capable of defending NATO territory and its airspace. This was stated by the Secretary General of the Alliance after today's drone attack on Poland. The country was attacked by 19 UAVs and 4 of them were shot down by the neighboring country's air force. At the same time, the Russians launched 415 strike drones of various types at Ukraine. Our air defenders destroyed 386 of them. But for Poland, this was the first time experiencing an air attack. There are damaged homes, several airports had to be closed, and Polish territorial defense soldiers were called upon to be ready for mobilization on short notice. At the same time, Prime Minister Donald Tusk convened an emergency government meeting. Details from Slawa TV correspondent Nataliya Volosatska.
A large-scale provocation is how Prime Minister Donald Tusk described what happened. He added that the military passed its first test, and although the situation is very serious, there is no reason to panic. I want to emphasize that this is the first time Poland has shot down drones that entered its territory. And now how it all began. As a result of a massive overnight attack on Ukraine, at least 10 drones entered Polish airspace. This time, the military used weapons against the targets. Preliminary reports indicate that the drones were shot down by Polish and Allied fighter jets. However, the exact number shot down is still unknown. Let's listen to the Prime Minister's direct statement.
We are dealing with a provocation of the highest level. At the same time, we are in constant communication with our allies, in ongoing contact with the NATO Secretary General, so that in the coming hours, days and beyond, we can act as cohesively as we are now and respond in the same way in the event of a similar threat. This is the first time we have had to shoot down Russian drones on the territory of a NATO country. And that is why all our allies are treating the situation very seriously.
The trajectory of the drones, the exact number, their types, and whether all of them were combat drones, at this moment we do not have this information. 4 airports were closed, 2 in Warsaw, 1 in Rzeszów, and 1 in Lublin. The Prime Minister explained that the airports were closed not because of the threat of a strike on them, but to meet the needs of military operations. Around 7 in the morning, it became known that except for the one in Lublin, all had resumed operations. There was also a warning for residents of 3 voivodeships, Podlaski, Mazowiecki, and Lubelski, to stay at home and wait for announcements from the army and police. However, by morning, all these restrictions were lifted. Now in Poland, people are asking whether this was an attack on a NATO country or a test of Poland's air defense systems. Because last week there were 2 incidents of drones crashing on Polish territory, but at that time it was reported that these were not combat drones, most likely smuggling drones. This time it's different. The Prime Minister convened an emergency government meeting. At least 3 drone fragments have already been found in different locations, one of them in the area of Czosnovka, 20 kilometers from the Belarusian border. It was lying in a field and caused no damage. But in the Werki commune of the Lublin voivodeship, there was an explosion, apparently because a Polish F-16 shot down a combat drone. The debris fell on a residential building, completely destroying the roof. Another drone likely crashed a few kilometers away from it. According to the authorities, no one was injured as a result of the incident. However, in the commune schools, elementary ones, were closed for an indefinite period. Across all of Poland, the authorities have appealed to people that if they come across such drone debris or any other suspicious objects, they should not approach them, but instead inform the military or the police. At this time, Defense Minister Władysław Kosiniak-Kamysz was in London, where he had already met with several colleagues. He is returning to Ukraine, to the country, but before that, he informed NATO partners, in particular, about what happened in Poland that night.
The president has already responded to the massive overnight missile and drone attack by the Russians, including the one on Poland. According to Zelensky, Moscow is always testing the limits of what is possible. And if it does not encounter a strong response, it remains at a new level of escalation, the president wrote on Telegram. He noted that today's attack was yet another step toward escalation as Iranian Shaheds attacked a NATO country. Zelensky called the actions of the Russians extremely dangerous for Europe. In his opinion, Russia must be held accountable for this. And I quote, "It must feel that the war cannot be expanded and will have to be ended." Delaying sanctions means more strikes, he emphasized, adding that there must be a strong joint response from the partners: Ukraine, Poland, all Europeans, and the United States. An unprecedented moment in NATO's history and the most serious violation of European airspace by Russia. These are the words with which a number of European leaders and officials are reacting to the incident in Poland. Russian drones in Poland are drawing sharp condemnation from the international community. EU countries are expressing their solidarity with Warsaw and its right to self-defense, while relevant officials are calling for the construction of a drone wall on Europe's eastern flank. How is NATO responding, and will it consider this an attack? Radio Liberty correspondent Zoryana Stepanenko will explain.
Russian drones have previously entered European airspace, but this time Europe is shocked by the scale. According to its prime minister, 19 drones ended up on Polish territory. The country's leadership saw them as a threat to its own citizens. That's why the unprecedented decision was made, not to just observe, as before, but to shoot them down. A NATO military spokesperson says that alliance aircraft have, for the first time, encountered potential threats in the airspace of allied countries. The Polish Prime Minister considers the operation to shoot them down, though debris is still being searched for, a success. Both Donald Tusk and Karol Nawrocki are in contact with NATO leadership, which still has to draw conclusions from last night.
This is an unprecedented moment in the history of the North Atlantic Alliance, but also in the history of this new Poland. This drone attack is truly exceptional. Ladies and gentlemen, we must fully draw conclusions from what has happened.
What is unprecedented is not only the number of Shaheds, but also the direction from which they were coming. The Polish Prime Minister says that for the first time since the start of Russia's full-scale war, drones were coming not only from Ukraine but also from Belarus. This fact makes many people wonder whether it is really a coincidence. A number of European leaders and top officials do not believe it is. For example, current EU diplomat Kaja Kallas openly speaks about signs of a deliberate violation of European airspace by Russia, which she also calls the most serious since the beginning of the war. It is also hard for the Czech Prime Minister to believe this is just a coincidence. The Putin regime, this is a quote from Petr Fiala on X, threatens all of Europe and systematically tests how far it can go. Volodymyr Zelensky also speaks about deliberate attacks, at the same time signaling his readiness to provide Poland with all the necessary data. The EU leadership considers this situation a test for Europe and emphasizes its full solidarity with Poland.
Yesterday, there was a missile strike on a village in Donetsk region, targeting people who were waiting to receive their pensions. More than 20 people were killed. And just today, we witnessed a reckless and unprecedented violation of Polish and European airspace by more than 10 Russian Shahed drones. Europe stands in full solidarity with Poland.
The head of the European Commission announced the allocation of €6 billion for investments in the capabilities of the Ukrainian armed forces. The initiative has been named the Drone Alliance with Ukraine. With this, it is clear which type of weaponry these funds will primarily be spent on producing. Ukraine is inventive enough. Von der Leyen emphasized that it is only necessary to scale up production. The EU considers strengthening Ukraine a guarantee of its own security as well. The incident in Poland was discussed at the level of ambassadors of EU member states as well as NATO. Mark Rutte refrained from commenting on whether the Russian drones were intentionally directed toward Poland.
Regardless of whether it was intentional or not, it is absolutely reckless and dangerous. But as I have already said, a full assessment is ongoing. And to Putin, my message is clear. Stop the war in Ukraine. Stop escalating the war that he is now effectively waging against civilians and civilian infrastructure. Stop violating the airspace of our allies and know that we are ready, vigilant, and defending every inch of NATO territory.
The appearance of drones in Polish airspace is also considered unacceptable by the President of France and even the Prime Minister of Hungary. But while Emmanuel Macron calls on Russia to put an end to this, quote, reckless escalation, Viktor Orban limits himself to abstract appeals to end living in the shadow of war. He considers his policy of insisting on peace to be the right one without mentioning under what conditions it should be established. From Brussels, Zoryana Stepanenko, Marek Hajduk, Radio Svoboda, especially for TSN 1+1.